Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sean Smith, and I'm very excited that you have joined us for today's webinar. Today's webinar is part 2 in a 3-part series. If you were not able to tune into or watch a recorded session of part 1, that's okay. We're going to catch you up pretty quickly today and cover most of the key things that we covered before in a abbreviated fashion. And we're really excited to showcase yet another outstanding district in the Modern Teacher Network in this part 2 series. So a couple of things before I begin. I did want to introduce today's facilitators for our virtual forum. My name is Sean Smith. I am the author of the Digital Convergence work and also the CEO of Modern Teacher. I have with me today Sue Holmes, who is the superintendent of School District 49 in Falcon Zone, Colorado. We're really excited for Sue to be able to share the story and the journey of Falcon Zone, which her team is incredibly proud of the hard work that they have done. We also have Brian Smith, executive principal of Firebird Nation Campus, with us. He is looking like in a very sunny, warm place right now. Looking at the palm trees behind him. So a shout out to Brian. We're excited you're here and welcome. We also have Lizette Casey, strategy officer for Modern Teacher and support for D49 Falcon Zone. Lizette will be moderating our chat forum. So if any of you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to type those in. She'll be moderating those as well. Before we begin, though, I wanted to remind everybody, or for those of you that are not familiar, we put on a national conference of digital convergence every year. And this coming year, in 2020, the host city will be Phoenix, Arizona, February 3rd and 4th. You can get a lot more information for NCDC 20 at ncdc20.com. We'd encourage you to take a look at that website and think about attending. It's an amazing conference where we get to spend a full day collaborating with folks from all around the United States following this common methodology. And we're super excited this year to showcase our national showcase school district, J.O. Combs from Arizona. We will be doing a site visit to J.O. Combs on February 3rd, the day before the conference, to see some of the amazing work and the classrooms that have been scaling personalized and modern learning in the district. A big shout out to J.O. Combs. I know we have several members from J.O. Combs on today's webinar. Just wanted to personally say hello and thanks for joining us. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and dive into today's webinar. And to make sure that all of us kind of understand the language that we're using here, we define modern learning as the students' experiences that directly reflect the competencies that they need to thrive after graduation. And all of the work that we talk about today is preparing to scale this beyond a couple of teachers and beyond some initial pilots that oftentimes begin in a district. Everything that you're going to see here today is all about scale. And we achieve scale by following a common process and methodology to actionize, or in some cases to help build your district's strategic plan. This methodology is not a new initiative for a district, but rather a process that people follow as they think about trying to put all of the conditions in place to scale your district's vision of modern learning. We also, as we think about this framework, think about how to bring that portrait of a graduate, that vision of a graduate that you want all of your kids to leave as they exit your school system and enter the world of work, or if they enter into their next phase of academic learning. They're equipped with those skills that you believe that they're ready to succeed in this fast-paced 21st century environment. And so as we think about this, we think about a framework and districts advancing through 7 stages of this work across 6 very important drivers in your school system. We define those big buckets of work, those big chunks of things that need to be tightly aligned together for an output of modern learning, to be all about the work of bringing things strategically together within your school system. For us, digital convergence is a strategic unification to the education system to really actionize and develop modern learning at scale. Ultimately, it is the integration of today's instructional pedagogies and curricular innovation combined with modern technology tools to really begin to reimagine the learning experience for kids. And what it is not, and this is an incredibly important piece of this work, it's not just simply the transition from traditional curriculum or learning to modern learning in a digital format. We use the term digital convergence because we deeply believe technology has a role in this, but it's not the central role. Ultimately, the convergence is those 6 big buckets of the system that I talked about earlier: leadership, instructional models, the modernization of curriculum, the building out of a digital ecosystem that includes digital content, devices, student information systems, learning management systems, assessment, into a robust ecosystem that feeds the end user experience very differently than it currently does today. The alignment of professional learning so that it's tightly consistent with the instructional model that you see fit for your school system. And then ultimately the role of community to expand the boundaries of where learning should occur beyond just the traditional classroom. Those big 6 drivers of this framework ultimately, when aligned, produce modern learning at scale and beyond just initial cohorts or pilots in action. This ultimately is a collective body of work. The last webinar in part 1 of this series, we focused on the new agenda, and we showcased Pickerington School District out of Ohio. If you haven't seen that video, I would encourage you to reach out to somebody from the Modern Teacher team, and you can get a recording of that. In the new agenda, we lay out the conditions that need to be present in a school system to begin to start to scale this work. The second phase of that work is all built around the book, The Shape of Change. It really manifests itself in stages 3 and 4 and 5 of this work. Today's webinar will focus on the key strategic milestones after the first 3 stages of this work are in place as we begin to get into stages 4 and 5. We'll showcase an exemplar district led by our superintendent here, Sue, and she'll talk us through the journey of District 49 in the Falcon Zone in Colorado and all of the things that they're putting in place reflected in the book, The Shape of Change. We'll also invite you to join us on our 3rd webinar in this series, where we focus on the 3rd book in this work called Wisdom and Influence, the ability of a leader to master the convergence framework and begin to manifest the changes in stages 6 and 7. That webinar will be coming up in the next month. So with that, I want to talk to you a little bit about, within the last webinar, those key strategic milestones in part 1 of this journey, how to create the conditions to scale this work. We talked about a district's theory of action, or a high-level plan that's testable, that you can continuously revisit and align to your strategic plan that gets at the key things you're setting out to achieve so that everybody on your steering committee and everybody in your district begins to be on the same page of where you're headed. The second key milestone in that is the ability to effectively message this and communicate this to all stakeholders. You want to invite them into the process so that they too can be with you in this journey as you reimagine what learning might look like 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now. And those key insights from all of your stakeholders begin to take shape in what we call a vision deck and a brand for your school district to reimagine the learning experience. This vision deck sets out a common language within your school system and begins to start to talk about all of the key instructional components of the classroom of the future. Most districts spend a lot of time reimagining their mission and vision statement, and we think it's critical to take that one step further and define the future of learning within the classroom, and that becomes a critical piece for building this out. And then the last piece of part 1 that we talked about the last time was this idea of an instructional model. The instructional model is an evolution from the work that you've probably done over the last decade, where you begin to reimagine the pedagogical practices as we infuse elements of personalized learning, competency-based learning, new and innovative technologies to engage kids in the learning process. Those things help define the vision of the classroom of the future in new ways. And so this instructional model becomes a very key part of what the Gallup research says most employees want from their employer, which is role definition and clarity. We know that when district visionary leaders start to talk about a reimagined learning environment, one of the things that naturally does for teachers is to have questions and curiosity and sometimes fear about the definition of their role and their current way they think about being a teacher. And so the instructional model helps begin to communicate where you're going to lead people and how you're going to align the entire school system over the course of the next several years around those key and vital instructional practices. So today, as we begin to introduce our district of distinction within this, we're going to dive into the key strategic milestones in part 2, which is now that we've got an instructional model in place, how do we begin to build proficiency amongst your workforce so that they can achieve those new pedagogical practices and become competent in that? But before we do that, we've asked Superintendent Sue to lead us through Falcon Zone's answers to part 1 of this so that you can understand how we build on when we get to part 2 and the solutions that they came up with as they worked their way through the framework. So with that, I would like to introduce Superintendent Sue Holmes, who will talk us through District 49 out of Colorado and Falcon Zone's answer through the first several stages of this work. Sue, welcome, and we're excited you're here.
Great, I'm excited as well. So just to give you a little context, District 49 is located on the eastern side of Colorado Springs, and our district is divided into 4 innovation zones, and we're all autonomous. The Falcon Zone is the furthest east and kind of suburban and rural. Next. And I'll introduce Brian is we'll tag team this presentation a little bit, and I'm glad he's here. So there you go, Brian.
Thanks. So again, I'm Brian Smith. I'm the executive principal for both Falcon Middle School and Bennett Ranch Elementary in District 49. And I have been in this zone ever since we began this process. I'm actually one of the only principals remaining. We've had others move into other positions in the district. And so when we were a core group together, we were at a crossroads trying to figure out how to better engage students in order for them to be successful. We did not just want to have technology and fancy tools. We wanted it to truly be embedded and be a part of the learning process and to make sure that the learning process transformed for our students. And so we knew we needed some form of a technology plan, but not just about acquiring devices. It truly was about transforming teaching and learning for our students. And so we participated in the Modern Teacher Adaptive District Assessment to get some feedback as far as where we were. 4 of us actually went to a site visit to Fraser Public Schools in Fraser, Michigan, who had embarked upon this journey. And so myself, our high school principal and an elementary principal, and our zone leader at the time all visited, and we were like kids in a candy store. We were so excited at what we saw, and we realized this is the direction that we needed to move as a zone in our district. And this motivated us to come back and move forward to really transform teaching and learning for our students. And so we came back, we had some new leaders join our team, and together Sue joined us as well as a couple other principals. And it was our first meeting together as a team where we realized, hey, we need to get to know each other, but we need to dive into this work too. And we really came together quickly and started to move forward to launch us forward with our brand that you're going to see in this next slide here. This direction together launched us into what we now call Empower FZ. And this is our brand for digital convergence in the Falcon Zone. Our brand truly represents this journey It's a vision about giving students the ability to chart their own course, to navigate turbulence, and enjoy the ride of this educational process. We have Empower FZ there because empowerment really is at the center of what we do. We want to keep our empowered learners at the focus, and we raise that to the power of Falcon Zone. That's why we have the FZ as our exponent, because we are raising it to the power of Falcon Zone to empower our learners. And you'll see our instructional model is actually embedded in there, our propeller. We'll talk about that here a little bit later on, but that propeller is about propelling our empowered learners forward.
So we have this huge question in front of us, and that was, how are we going to scale modern learning? We had this vision of what it looks like, but how are we going to get there? And so in order to build the foundation for this, we created our theory of action, and we have basically three statements, three if-then statements that allowed us to organize our vision. And when we elaborate these statements, they show us skills that really paint the portrait of our graduates. If we build positive relationships through safe and caring learning environments, then student learning, achievement, and resilience will increase. And so we've got these three statements boiled down into a nutshell so that they're easy for our staff to recall and really understand what we're trying to do. We will revisit these statements as we progress through our journey toward digital convergence. Next. So our empowered learners start looking different from our traditional classrooms. Next. And we see different types of learning that is the opposite of what we typically saw in our classrooms. So we're starting to see these classrooms transformed. Next. Our empowered learners co-construct their learning environment, interact with content, make sense of and draw meaning from resources, and demonstrate knowledge and understanding. And they also learn content deeply and engage in inquiry about who they are as learners. And finally, they become lifelong learners and possess the skills to face future challenges resourcefully and creatively. And this is what we want our graduates to do.
So you're seeing here on this slide, here's where our propeller comes back into play, where this is our instructional model. And as the three blades of the propeller come together, you'll see it creates our falcon in the middle, representing our Falcon Zone, but more importantly, our empowered learner. Our falcons, our empowered learners, are at the center of all we do. And we want to make sure that we provide those engaging environments, those enhanced opportunities, and that elevated instruction all coming together to truly empower our learners. And so when we talk about these more specifically on the next slide, you'll see that engaging environments is one of the first main propeller blades that we focus on. And so with an engaging environment, we want to make sure that students learn differently today than they have in the past. We must engage our learners in environments where they enhance our opportunities and elevate instructional practices. There's a high demand for cutting edge opportunities for students, and leading these efforts will provide the best way to engage students in their pathway experiences. So our focus in this part of our instructional model is that we will increase learner voice in our classrooms. We will create a safe and caring learning environment, both in school and online, and we'll develop blended and flexible learning experiences for our learners. The second blade is about having enhanced opportunities. And this is where we'll ensure students have cutting edge experiences to explore and support the learning of essential content and skills. And so our components of this blade is that we want to make sure we have learner choice, we have authentic and creative learning experiences, and we're teaching our students to be global collaborators, how to interact with others around the world. The final blade is about elevated instruction. And this is where teaching has become more about assessment and accountability recently versus meeting the needs and successes of the whole student. So we want to make sure that we're elevating our instruction with creative and innovative experiences where students take ownership of their learning. Success can be defined in multiple ways, and we want to ensure students are demonstrating competency of essential content and skills. And so these best practices focus on learner-driven and personalized experiences so that students take ownership of this learning, that we're competency-based in our environments to allow learners to advance based on the mastery of learning at the appropriate time in their learning, and that we have pedagogical practices that emphasize inquiry-based and knowledge construction by learners with teachers facilitating these experiences. And when all of these three blades come together, this creates our instructional model, the Empower FZ instructional model, where empowered learners are the focus of what we do.
So we use goal cycles to keep us focused and to track our progress. And, you know, when we started creating goal cycles within the Modern Teacher platform, Lizette, our strategy officer, would create our goal cycles for us. And then we kind of evolved where Lizette and I would create them together. And then one day she said, okay, Sue, it's time for you to create the goal cycle. And so I dove in and really assessed kind of where were we and what were we going to do next. And so the goal cycles consist of our success indicators in the various driver areas and what is next in what we need to accomplish to get to our great goal. And it was really cool. In our last leadership meeting, I had the entire team, so all principals and I really assessed where we are in the platform, and we created our current goal cycle together. So that was really exciting for all of us. I think one of the strengths of our team is that we are fully invested equally in our work.
That's great. And so that was a pretty quick review to give you some context of what we covered in part one, but using a different district to kind of tell the story. And all of those concepts that Sue and Brian just talked to you about all show up in the new agenda, which is the first book in the series. Now we're going to flip to the second book, which is getting us into stage 4 of this work, and how Falcon Zone built upon the success of those conditions that they put in place to then begin to start to look at what was actually happening in the classroom as it related to their instructional model. And so the 4 success, big key strategic milestones and success indicators that we're going to cover today start with defining really key identifiers for your instructional model. So Brian talked to you a little bit about a high level 3 big pieces of that kind of blade that he talked about. Now we need to peel back the onion a little bit and say, if I were to walk into any of our classrooms, what exactly should I be looking for when I start to see these big things in place? And that was the next line of their work. And so they're going to talk you through a little bit about what that looks like.
So yeah, we created this, this basically guide sheet of what we expect what we want to see in classrooms. And I think what's important is that we keep foremost in front of our people our logo, what that means, and who our empowered learners are, and that they're at the center of it. And when you look at the second column where it says characteristics, we were real intentional about developing these I statements. I develop a learning environment instead of the teacher will develop. And so it becomes not evaluative. It becomes very, teachers take ownership of what they will be doing in their classrooms. And then if you look further to the right, the last column, the professional learning column, you can see that each of these are tied to different aspects of the Modern Teacher professional learning platform. And that's just on page 2. We've got a 2-page document that guides what we want to see and what we want to hear in our classrooms.
And why this is such a critical component to their plan, and I keep going back to the Gallup research, is as Falcon began to develop their instructional model, they started to put in place the clear definition of the role of the teacher as they become proficient and competent in this environment. But obviously we know that there's a gap from their current practices to these new practices. And one of the things that we always talk about is that tone from the top. Being able to give teachers a risk-free, supportive coaching environment to be able to let them explore these practices, try them out in the classroom, learn part of the core principles of these, maybe in an online environment, but then eventually go into their classroom and begin to try these in a non-evaluative way. Malcolm Gladwell talks about intentionally understanding a tipping point. And we believe in stage 4 of this work, that as you begin to get teachers engaged in this type of practice, reflective practice over and over within their own classrooms in a supportive, risk-free environment, that slowly over time you will build a strategic tipping point of proficiency as it relates to your vision of where you want to take learning in the future. And there's no better example of this than what Falcon has created here in this document. It's an unbelievably powerful guiding document, and they've done it in a way that sets such a powerful tone to allow their teachers to try these practices and become proficient over time. The next part, as Sue started to talk about, is that tight alignment to being able to engage in this work. A solid professional learning plan is only as good as the outcomes that you want to see. And when we take a step back and look at this, they have clearly defined the outcomes for a proficiency in this new 21st century modern classroom. And then with that, they've identified opportunities within their professional learning for teachers to be able to dive into this and become engaged with that. That is the key here. Aligned professional learning plan. It's not just a professional learning plan, but tightly aligned to the vision of a proficient workforce as it relates to their instructional model.
So that's a perfect segue, because we have then worked on making sure we had the right professional learning in place to truly get our teachers grounded in this work to transform teaching and learning. And so we took our instructional model and broke the components down into different goals that we wanted our teachers to achieve using the professional learning platform within the Modern Teacher website. Our first big thing, though, in establishing goal 1, we wanted to make sure teachers and staff were truly grounded in the work we did to establish our theory of action, to have this vision of teaching and learning, and a good understanding of what this instructional model was all about. And so we created our own professional learning module that was the basis of goal 1. And that's really all that's contained in our first goal. We want teachers and staff to have the same exact level of grounding in what Empower FZ is all about. What does it mean to propel our learners forward for the future? So goal 1 is our own developed module where staff learn about our vision and how to best apply Empower FZ principles to what they do every day. For our other 3 goals, we took the different professional learning modules from the Modern Teacher platform, and we embedded them into goals 2, 3, and 4. And so goal 2 is about our engaging environments, so making sure they have the tools and supports to learn how to create an environment that is truly engaging for our learners. Goal 3 focuses around enhanced opportunities, that they have the skills to create those authentic, creative, collaborative experiences to help students dive forward in their learning. And then goal 4 is centered around the elevated instruction blade of our propeller, how to get those facilitated learning experiences where instruction truly elevates to a level that is personalized towards meeting students' needs. And so all of our staff are progressing through these 4 goals as they're participating in that professional learning.
That's great. And so before I kind of jump into the third strategic milestone here in book 2, Lizette, I want to jump in and see if there's any burning questions out there and see if you have anything to add that might be helpful before we get into the next 2.
Sean, thanks. No burning questions in the chat, so please feel free to ask questions in the chat if you have them as they come up. I think that eventually, maybe we'll just in closure ask Brian and Sue to talk about the building of excitement as they got ready to launch professional learning with their staff, because that is some magic that certainly happened in the Falcon Zone, that teachers were very excited to begin this work, and I think that was in the way that it was kicked off to them. So maybe in closure or in the accelerated classrooms, they might touch on that.
That's great. Thanks, Lizette. And yeah, please feel free to use the chat. We do have a moderator and we'd love to incorporate some of your questions into our discussion today. So one of the things that we glean from a large body of research, because we have so many school districts across the United States leveraging the process and methodology to create their own vision for modern learning, is what we have found is while you're building the conditions to scale success across your district and you're putting in some of these key strategic milestones, sometimes that may take 6 to 12 to even 18 months to get a big chunk of those processes and the vision of modern learning in place. One of the things that we do, because we know that you have to be able to start to see some of the fruits of your labor immediately, is we begin a process called accelerated classrooms that almost runs simultaneously while the district is putting these processes in place. So accelerated classrooms begins to engage a very small group of teachers that you identify, that they can opt into, that they can self-select. They tend to be some of your high flyers. It can be 2 teachers, 3 teachers, 4 teachers, 6 teachers. It doesn't matter to us. But what we want to do is we want to accelerate a key group of folks, 2, 3, 4, 5 teachers, to begin to start to put some of the learner-centered practices in place in their classrooms. And it does several things. One, it gives people in your district a glimpse of what this actually looks like in practice. That way, you don't have to do what Falcon did, which was travel to Fraser, Michigan to go see this in place. We're trying to put some processes in place that help people see this within their own systems. But the second thing that this does is it begins to involve the teacher voice in this, and it allows for teachers to give feedback to the district steering committee as you're developing the instructional model. What's working? What's not working? How do we tweak professional learning aligned to this so that when you eventually roll this out to what we call your main field, the next group of teachers and subsequent cohorts of teachers after that, you'll have things worked and tweaked a little bit more refined than when you would if you would have waited, say, 12 months. So it accomplishes 2 very important things for us. The first is you begin to see this in practice right away. The second is you get teacher voice involved immediately in the process, giving feedback to the steering committee as they begin to work through the model, so that by the time you roll it out to your main field and get all of your teachers excited about this, you've tested this a little bit and you kind of know what you're walking into. And that becomes a key thing with this. So Brian and Sue are going to talk to us a little bit about what they did when they began to roll out the professional learning for their teachers.
So this was an exciting process for our zone because we at first were worried we were going to have to develop a lot of professional learning. And when we found the power of the Modern Teacher platform to help really engage in this work, it really ignited some momentum for us now to empower our teachers to really jump in and take charge of that. And so each principal developed a professional learning plan for their school on how to get their staff to jump in and begin this process. And I know at the secondary level, myself and the high school principal, we took our whole staff through architecting a learner-centered culture, because that truly is a process that needs to be in place and have staff grounded in to let this work carry forward. And so over this past year, all of our staff started to jump in and really learn about the different literacy components that are contained in that learner-centered culture module. And as teachers dove in, the excitement built, and they saw they were earning badges. They saw that it was being tracked. They saw that things were being in place. And several teachers, well, how do I go further? What do I do next? And that momentum really started to build. I initially started with a first cohort of teachers that also began to implement fluencies in their classroom and try the different practices that were incorporated in that part of the module. And those teachers, now I'm excited to say, are going to be coaches this next year to really help the whole staff move forward, because we want to accelerate this process. We want to get more teachers through this process quickly because that energy and that momentum is there. And so as a leader, what you're seeing on your screen right now, this dashboard graphic really gives me a great idea to look at. Where is my building at? Where is our zone at? How are people progressing? Our staff actually all wanted to see everybody completing the learner-centered culture at the literacy level. They wanted to see that circle be all green at the end of this year, and they did, and they celebrated, and they were excited. And so now we know that the real work begins this next year of all staff implementing this fluency level work of this module to really get that learner-centered culture in place. And so this is going to propel us forward with these different components.
That's great, Brian. And to give people that may not be familiar with kind of some of the how we built the professional support for districts, we have a bank of modules that exist in the platform that cover a range of topics that most districts tend to be interested in. Learner-centered physical environments, how to create an online environment for engaging kids, how to look at writing curriculum around personalized learning. There's a host of modules. What we do is once you've developed your instructional model, we sit down and look at those modules and we say which of these modules align to which parts of your instructional model, which ones need to be customized, which ones do we need to build new modules. You heard Sue and Brian talk about the fact that they built a module all around what empower means, and they put that as part of their goal 1. So there's lots of ways to be able to leverage this, but that's that aligned professional learning support. We take your instructional model, we look at the bank of modules that we have, and we start to put them under each one that makes sense for you. We build new content where it makes sense, or you have the ability to build your own content within that. And then the second thing that Brian talked about was the idea that all of the modules are put in 2 what we call levels. Level 1 is literacy. Can I get the information and can I understand it, and am I able to articulate it back to somebody? That doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to go do it in your classroom, but that's the foundational building blocks for learning anything. It's that first part of it. So all of the modules start with a literacy component. Am I literate in whatever the design principle is or that particular part of the model? The second one, as Brian talked about, is fluency. Am I fluent in those behaviors? Can I go into the classroom and actually begin to do those? And so that's the second part, or the second badge or micro-credential in all of our modules. And they're always broken down into two components, 2 micro-certifications or badges as they relate to each other. So those are an important component of that. So then as we look at the next part of all of this, as they begin to put their pieces in place, the next obvious question that people would ask is, well, as my teachers become literate and then fluent in parts of my model, how do I have information on that? And we use this information not because we want to evaluate people at this stage. When you're in stage 4 of this work, it's not about evaluation. It's about being able to ensure that the professional learning is meeting the needs of your teachers so that they can become proficient in your instructional model. When we see data lacking or when we see progress not being made, then we can go in and strategically with your team help design a set of interventions that may be new content. Maybe it's because high school calculus is struggling with these examples and we need new examples. I'm not sure exactly what it would tell us, but when we look at that, we can begin to dive deeper into this because the data systems tell us that. And so the 4th strategic milestone of book 2 in this journey is assuring that you have data systems that can tell you who is proficient at what part of your model so that you can use that information to continue to coach people up. So for this particular example, Brian, I think you're going to talk through the data sets and what these mean as it relates to the goals for your instructional model.
Sue, I think you might have this one actually.
So yeah, the graphs are really important to us to really assess where we are. And this year was our year of engaging our teachers in this work. And like Brian said, we started off on a cohort model, and we had a small number of teachers at each of our buildings that really were diving into this work. And we realized that our initial vision of our cohorts being done and a new cohort starting each semester of school was not going to be the reality. And so we have shifted what we anticipate our work to be. Goal 2 is a hefty goal. It is our goal that all of our teachers will complete Goal 2 throughout this upcoming school year. That's the pace where we think we will be. But we certainly know that this is our first time. We developed these goals without having a full understanding of how much time it will take for teachers not just to learn and get the literacy part of it, but to actually put some things into action, set things up, and experience what these concepts are in their buildings and in their classrooms.
Yeah, and what a powerful example as Sue is talking about here. Now Falcon Zone can go and say, well, you know, I've got just about 10% of my teachers proficient in Goal 2. And it's a very different way to have a conversation than saying 80% of my teachers attended a training on this date. Now they can do a lot of things with that. One of which is to say 10% of the teachers don't need to be working on Goal 2. They actually can be doing something else. And that's a piece of how we actually personalize the adult learning experience just as much for teachers as we need to do for kids. And the data sets give you those examples. The other thing here that you can see, and I'm not sure if Brian or Sue is going to talk to this, is their progress as it relates to the 6 drivers of convergence. You'll notice here that this graph is called the shape of change underneath to the left of the DCF score. So you can see what stage they're in each of those drivers. And it's, you know, no surprise that we're talking about book 2, the shape of change, because that really is the work of stages 3, 4, and 5 as you look at this. So I don't know if you have anything to add to this, but it's a really powerful example. To be able to get a district to this place is such a testimony to all of the conditions that are in place to scale this work. And that's what, you know, Jim Collins talks about, the flywheel effect. When you get to this point, that flywheel is just going to get faster because you've put all the conditions in place so that everybody understands the direction that you're headed with a clear and common language of where you're taking them.
I'll just add that that it tells the story of our journey, and our team can look at it and assess where we were and how much hard work was put into each of these portions of this this line graph of our journey. And we know the hard work, but we also really relish the celebrating of our accomplishments. And it's been good work.
This graph keeps us moving. It brings us closer as a team because we want to continue to improve. We want to continue to grow. And this shape of change shows that there's been times where we've kind of flatlined, where we feel like, oh, are we really making progress? But we are. And seeing those growths and celebrating those achievements as we move the whole staff forward, and we're able to show them this growth and what we're doing to achieve the next stages within the digital convergence framework has been a huge celebration. And we really want to keep going with this, and we're looking forward to continue to see improvements with this shape of change.
That's great. And for those of you that are new to this framework, I'd encourage you to reach out to one of our network membership members and get a copy of the shape of change. I show lots of illustrations in this second book about this shape of change, and I actually define what to look for when you start to see this shape that's dynamic and ever moving within your organization. It helps you really diagnose where you're at with the district and where you need to go.
So we've been pretty successful, I'd say really successful as a team. And you can tell by the pictures, we have a good time together. We have a lot of ingredients that add to our success. We work hard. We work through the tough stuff together. We persevere. We have really strong connections with each other. We are professional, but I think each of us would call each other a friend because that's how closely we work together. We trust our team. We laugh a lot. We gather around food and fun, and we celebrate. We celebrate every time we make it to a new stage. So we recently hit stage 4, and we celebrated, and Then we remembered Lizette in the background, so we got back to work. We're on our way, moving up to get to stage 5. We know that's going to be a journey, but we are up to it.
That's wonderful.
We push each other as a team, and our staff sees that. Our teachers see that, and they see us challenging each other as leaders, and that helps them challenge each other's within the classroom to grow as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And you know, I would say that the word that really sticks out, the top 2 there for me, is hard work and perseverance. It does take that. When you get to this stage, it can be, you know, it's tough, grueling, disciplined work. And you heard Sue at the beginning talk about goal cycles. We chunk this work into small pieces so that you can feel success, celebrate success, inch forward and move on. But, you know, I think all of us that are on this webinar are committed to the idea that our kids need reimagined learning environments if they're going to move into a world that is just vastly different than when we all, you know, went to school, and the types of jobs that they're going to have. And it requires us to rethink what the experiences for kids are going to look like. So with that, Lizette, I'm going to ask if we've got any questions out there from anybody, and I'll let you kind of ask some of those questions.
Sean, there are no questions in the chat. There's been a little discussion around how this fits into or incorporates the special education side of education, as all students may not necessarily fit the graduate profile. And I don't know if you want to just address that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. You know, I think a lot of districts did, you know, a tremendous amount of work, probably 7 to 10 years ago, around RTI, and some of you may still be involved in RTI. And, you know, I remember as a building principal in 2005, 15 years ago, when I had all of the students in my entire school on my wall in my office, and had them color-coded with markers, tier 2, and we were trying to put in tier 3 interventions in place. And what I've realized around this work is when we can flip the switch away from intervening to being more proactive and personalizing the experience, and I realized that, you know, this is a complete makeover of the way we really educate kids, that I see special education kids in this type of environment really flourishing in a way that's not from the deficit model, but actually from a model that takes all of their interests and experiences and caters the education system around them. We know that there are kids, without question, that have tremendous obstacles in their lives, whether or not it's because they, you know, live in a neighborhood that may not be safe, or because they come from places of poverty, or because they have learning difficulties. But I see the vision of modern learning being able to wrap all of our arms around kids and really reimagine the system in a way that doesn't progress kids through a series of interventions, but actually maps out a journey for them that's unique to them. But the system is able to do that, and not just at the whim of one great teacher or 2 great teachers in an educational career for a kid, that the system is nimble enough to do that. So I don't think we're there yet, but I do think it's an aspirational vision that when we start to see districts get to this place, I see this actually taking over RTI. I think it's just going to look very different.
Great, that's it so far. So
that's great. Other things to add, Brian or Sue, things that we may have missed?
I don't think so.
I might just add that there's always a place to reach out to a network membership team member, a strategy officer, Sean. We're always there for you to respond, ask questions.
Yeah, and we'd love to invite you to see what this third part of this work looks like, wisdom and influence, as we move into stages 6 and 7 of this work, and really bringing in the community aspect. The next webinar, part 3 of this series, will feature community in this journey. And the last thing I think that I would leave you with is to remember what we've built here is not an initiative, it's not a program, it's a scientific research-based methodology and a common language for change management across a system. And ultimately, you're the narrators of that journey. You decide where you're going to take your community and your school district. You decide how you're going to redefine modern learning. What we do come equipped with is a national network that we can leverage. Folks like Sue and Brian on this webinar, folks like J.O. Combs, who we're going to go visit in Arizona in February, attached to our national conference, folks like Pickerington in Ohio, who was on webinar number 1, and Cajon Valley, who's going to be on webinar number 3. So what we come with is a broad national perspective that shares the best insights, our latest thinking, and critical practices on how people are moving forward. And the tie that binds us is the methodology, the success indicators, this common language. We can say, well, I answered this way, we did it this way. And quite frankly, we can beg, borrow, and steal from people, because that's the innovation. That's the way that the power of a network grows exponentially, because we're sharing these insightful practices. So, think of it as organizing the work you're already doing with a big family that's going to help support you in moving you from wherever you're at to wherever you want to go. Well, a big shout out to Sue and Brian. We thank you tremendously for sharing your story. You should be incredibly proud of your work. Continue to celebrate. It's amazing. And we look forward to coming and visiting some of those classrooms and seeing as the teachers are beginning to put these practices in place, because it looks like a place that I'd want to go back and be a kid again and go to school, which is pretty exciting. Thank you from all of us at Modern Teacher. Lizette, thank you for moderating this. And for everybody that joined in the dialogue today, we thank you and invite you to webinar number 3. And if you don't have a copy of The Shape of Change, I'd encourage you to reach out to somebody from Modern Teacher and get a copy of that. Have a good day, everybody. Take care.